Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce, as Ukraine War Frontline update for the 4th of July 2023. And I must commiserate my friends across the pond for their terrible decision they made all those years ago that led to them being where they are today. So apologies, US, on behalf of your ancestors there. That Independence Day really has set you back a long way in terms of cultural evolution and just standing in the world, I guess. But nonetheless, we'll go on with our frontline updates and keep things, modern and up to date. Right, we'll go to whatever. We'll go to the usual starting point, which is the northeastern sector, the axis from Kupiansk to Svatva to Kreminna. On my map, that looks like this. Different colors, same stuff. We have Russian lines represented by blue of the pro-Ukrainian mapper Andrew Perpetua and the red of the pro-Russian mapper Syriac Maps. They both denote the Russian defensive lines, just different interpretations of the data. Different sources, so on and so forth. Right, we'll go to the Institute for the Study of War, American military think tank to see their update for the this sector. The Russian MOD claimed that the Russian forces repelled Ukrainian attacks near Makiivka, Torska, Yampolivka, Zolotarivka, and so on and so forth. And Russian mill bloggers claim that Ukrainian forces attacked near Nevska and the Serebryantska forest. On the other hand, Russian mill bloggers claim that Russian forces attacked Ukrainian positions near Novoselivska. Okay, let's put all of those names into the map and give you the proper context. No reports of activity up here in the north near Sinkiivka, where the Russians were making some advances towards Kupiansk. Nonetheless, the Russians are supposedly pushing at Kuzmivka, Novoselivska there, which is to the north west of Svatva. Other than that, it appears that the Russians are claiming the Ukrainians are doing the attacking. Makiivka, Nevska, Torska, Serebryantski Forest, all of these areas there, and Zolotarivka. Just need to remember what Yampolivka is another one. So on and indeed so forth. There's Zolotarivka just down near Verkhnokhomianska, south of Bilohorivka. I just forgot to actually just give you some general updates. And actually, while we're on this Luhansk front, on the Eastern Front, the number of Russian troops is more than 180,000 people, says Cherevati, the speaker for the Ukrainian forces in the East. That is 120,000 on the Kupiansk-Liman direction and 50,000 in Bakhmut, giving you around 180,000, 170,000, 80,000. Of course, one must be careful because those troops might sound like that's a lot of troops sitting in trenches. Actually, most of those will be, the troops, as this source says, for one soldier up in the front, it takes 2 to 6 troops behind them to keep them up in the front. The cooks, people doing paperwork, mechanics, transport, medical, etc. So there's not a lot of combat power overall. So that is really important to note, as well as the idea, same source here saying, I don't think Russia knows how outmatched, in fact, they are. The 49th is now just a shell with only 1 brigade, the 61st, and 1 division, the 7th. Both are gutted, and the rest of what you see is made up of badly supplied territorial defense forces, lightly armed and hardly trained. Part-time mobilized territorial defense forces are circled here in the map. And yes, the tank regiment is equipped with T-62 and T-55. So what he's saying is, yeah, you might have a number of troops, but they're kind of cobbled together in lots of different forces and not in a good way. And he's concentrating here on the Kherson front, saying that, yeah, the forces there are just for poor force quality. The constitution of those units is problematic. But when you look at the larger picture, yes, there might be a lot of, scare quotes, troops, but actually how many of them are frontline troops that are being thrown into the fray? And it's a different picture when you understand it like that. Okay, let's go back to this Kupiansk area. The Rebar, the pro-Russian source, says that in the Starobelsk direction, the Ukrainians are attempting to counterattack in the Torska salient and the Serebryantski forest. Russian troops are actively defending and holding previously occupied positions. And then really that's that for the entire area. So it looks like the Ukrainians are starting to attack more in that area. We have seen some advances apparently by the Russians more recently here. It could be the ebb and flow. It could be a turning tide as the Ukrainians put more forces into that area. Bear in mind that, of course, there are fairly high troop concentrations around here. I know I was just saying that, yep, there's a lot of cooks and mechanics and medics and whatnot. But as far as I understand it, actually, the Russians do have the better troop concentration around this area than they do in other areas of the front line. Then we come down to Bakhmut, which is here. There's another line now, still a Russian defensive line. It's the yellow of Deep State Maps, the pro-Ukrainian mapper, but they do have a 48 to 72 hour OPSEC, operational security delay on their mapping. Not a lot of claims of the area from Rebar. In fact, no claims of Bakhmut at all. But there is activity going on there, quite a lot actually. So we come down in the ISW to what they say. Russian mill bloggers continue to discuss Ukrainian counteroffensive operations southwest of Bakhmut, particularly between Kupiansk and Klishchivka. Geolocated combat footage posted on July the 2nd shows that Ukrainian forces have advanced towards the tree line west of Klishchivka, and we'll come to that footage in a second. Let's just look at some general claims concerning Bakhmut. The Defense Ministry has said that there is escalation on the Bakhmut front, advances on the southern flank. The battlefield situation has, quote, escalated again in the Bakhmut area, with two sides trying to gain the initiative, says Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Malia. Ukrainian forces are advancing on the city's southern flank near the village of Klishchivka, said Malia. However, quote, however, the situation is changing very rapidly. Control over some positions can be lost and regained twice a day. That's to say, it's tough and possibly getting tougher. Yet, actually, I think the Ukrainians are making more gains at the moment. Last 24, 48 hours, they seem to be gaining greater success. There's talk about gaining success down south quite a lot, and that's what Hanna Malia talks about, with saying perhaps there's like consolidation up in the north, but then there are rumors coming out today from Russian sources that actually things are tough for them in the north, which is good for the Ukrainians. Let's look to some of these. So Ukrainian sources here fighting on the front line in Bakhmut, Osman and Bakhmut Demon confirm further progress near Klishchivka. Based on our information, the Ukrainian forces managed to kick the Russian troops out of the strategic positions on the north and northeast outskirts of Klishchivka. There's only one field to the settlement. We'll come to that in a second. So just to talk more about Klishchivka, the forest is under Russian control. So this is Ukrainian control. This is all the forest area actually. So on my map, Andrew Perpetua here in the area has, oops, that's to the north. Let's go to the south. We're going to look at Klishchivka, which is this village that sits below a kind of bluff, a hill that comes along here. This is a high ground to the west, and on that high ground there are some forest areas. There is one just to the north here, one directly west, and one slightly further south. The argument is that the forest areas are under Ukrainian control, particularly this one. So Andrew Perpetua's line would possibly be further forward, and it looks like they are, fighting over this trench network that we see to the west of Klishchivka on the high ground, the northwest there. So they'll be fighting over that. It appears that there's only one kind of field between the Ukrainians and the Russians here. So one could imagine that fighting would take place in Klishchivka today for sure. I did sort of say that yesterday as well. Possibly could be happening yesterday. Everything's obviously slow going when you've got trench networks to outmaneuver. Idar battalion says Klishchivka forest south of Bakhmut has come under our control, but the Russians have deployed 50,000 troops to the area. Again, how many of those are frontline troops? But yeah, as you can see there, forest area supposedly under Ukrainian control. There's this one up here. Still a bit of disagreement by some of the mappers involved in that mapping. Andrew Perpetua does have that under Ukrainian control, as you can see here, that forest there. Deep State map, a couple of days behind. Syriac maps, not been doing too much current mapping, bits and pieces, but I think with the Ukrainians being on the attack, maybe they are less invested in changing the maps. I don't know. That is a bit of speculation. Probably might be unfair. Okay, so that's Klishchivka. A lot of fighting over Klishchivka, as you can see. Now, to add to that, I said alarming information coming from the area north of Bakhmut, says a Russian source that War Monitor is relying on. Of course, there's no verification of that, no even mentioning references of what source that is. So, take that with a pinch of salt, of course. But things could be tough here. We've seen the Ukrainians advance along the E40 highway, the northern main supply route coming into Bakhmut. There's fighting around Bakhivka. There's talk about fighting in Bakhivka yesterday. I haven't heard anything about Bakhivka in the last 24 hours. That could be what that sort of cryptic reference pertains to, but it might not. The north, is a large area that could be Vesele, Rozdilivka, where the Ukrainians have had some success, coming down towards Yakovlivka. It could be the main supply route there, or Orikovo-Vasilivka or Dubovo-Vasilivka, these areas on the slightly higher ground there, before it comes down to the reservoir that's now empty, and Bakivka. Okay, let's look at a few more sources. Grey Zone, which is affiliated to Wagner, says the Ukrainians are not abandoning attempts to flank Bakhmut. Of course they're not, from two sides, and are succeeding. The situation is becoming more difficult after Wagner forces were replaced by Russian regular forces. Of course, I would say that. They are Wagner themselves pretty much, but it's also true. I think since Wagner pulled out, they had culminated, so I think they had exhausted themselves anyway. But the claim is that the Ukrainians, and this is a slightly twisted map. This is north is over here, north, south is down here. But yes, the Ukrainians have been getting more success since Wagner have left, and the Russian MOD are in position. But you can see that's Bakivka there. We can see the main supply route coming down here, the highway coming in with movement there. I'm just trying to see if actually that accords with, see this main kind of hilly area there. If we look at that previous map, that's that hilly area there, I think. Let's see if I can zoom in any further. So if we have that bit going along there, right, just doing a bit of, I think the Wagner, that telegram map from the Russians, so bear in mind this is a Russian source, is actually showing greater advances for the Ukrainians than the other mappers. I think that's worth looking into, that map. I might have to see what that shows. Particularly if there's north, I think there could be some areas around here that show greater control for the Ukrainians. Anyway, moving on, here is another. Oh, this is the geolocation, right? So let's go back to what the ISW said. So the ISW said geolocated combat footage posted on July the 2nd. So this is 2 days ago, shows that Ukrainian forces have advanced towards a tree line west of Klishchivka. This is quite difficult, I think, because it just shows, what does it show? Yeah, it shows a blowing up of a vehicle. So I'm not sure that definitely shows advancing. It shows that a vehicle has been destroyed in that area. Where is that area? Well, it is here. So you can see the sped up footage there of the vehicle getting hammered. Let's put that in. That vehicle is in this position, which is near Klishchivka. So that vehicle was taken out there. That's 2 days ago. A Russian vehicle being blown up there. And the claim is now that the Ukrainians are further forward. So I don't know that particularly confirms or disconfirms any claims. That's kind of what you would expect, given actually either of these narratives, either of these two mappers. That's consistent with that. So it doesn't help us a crazy amount. Anyway, the rest of the source here says, actually no, it's not worth looking into that. There is another bit of geolocated footage that I think is more useful to look into around Adiivka. So we'll go to Adiivka now. That is the Bakhmut area. We are seeing, just before we go to Adiivka, last thing I'll say concerns just this area around Klishchivka. I think you are seeing success, obviously, around Klishchivka. You're seeing success coming down the canal from the north. And I was talking about potential success coming up from the south, from maybe Mayorsk. You could see that the canal has been crossed to the south here, so they're on the Ukrainians are on the eastern side of the canal, and that could help them push up north to Ozarianivka. However, interestingly, and I finished my deep state mapping here. But actually, Deep State Map showed the only bit of change they showed today in the two areas that I'm copying Deep State Map over. So Avdiivka and here in Bakhmut, they had Russian gains. So it changed, and remember, this is 2 to 3 days old, possibly. But this area, so the mapping went back there previously, and now the Russians have control of this area, which is in line with Syriac maps. So I don't know what's going on there. Whether that is currently where the Russians are at, or and is that showing a counterattack by the Russians in that area, or is that land that they'd already had, but the deep state just had confirmed it, and now they've seen footage to confirm that the Russians control that, and it might be that the Ukrainians never did have that, or at least recently. So anyway, that's the situation. Lots of activity around Bakhmut. We'll keep our ears peeled today to see how that changes. Coming down to Avdiivka, not a huge amount as yesterday in the Avdiivka area, although I'm sure it's tough fighting. Russian forces continue ground attacks along the front there. Ukrainian General Staff reporting that there's activity near Avdiivka. In fact, they repelled 14 Russian ground attacks near Marinka. Wow. So that's 14 attacks in Oops, sorry, came out too quickly there. So Avdiivka's there. Marinka is this town to the south. We won't go to Marinka yet. We're going to look at some activity around Pervomaisky. So there are claims that the Ukrainians are pushing the Russians right back in Pisky. Remember some time ago, there was a lot of fighting in Pervomaisky, this long, thin town. It's complete rubble. It's a hellscape, that. But over time, the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back and back, and they are now back in Pisky, where they were fighting over, some time ago, like months and months and months ago. Actually, when I started doing my mapping, the Russians were about here. This is not far from their 2014 lines here. So, and here's the airport that there was a lot of activity over during the 2014 conflict. Well, what the ISW says here is geolocated footage posted on the 3rd of July, so yesterday, shows that Russian forces have made marginal advances southeast of Pervomaisky. So they are claiming that the footage shows marginal Russian advances in this area. I am going to completely contest that. I think it shows the opposite, and it certainly doesn't show Russian advances. So I can't quite understand. Now, some of you might have seen this footage because it went viral yesterday. Because, like, what is going on? You've got a naked person running away from a tank here, and then falling over. It's just weird. Anyway, I will turn off the sound, of course. So here we have 3 people running away. They're abandoning a tank. Someone appears to be naked and trousers around his ankles, and then can't get the trousers off and then falls over. And then they just run away. And it's just, what is going on? Why is that guy naked with his trousers around his ankles, trying to run away and then falling over? That is the geolocated. This has then been geolocated to this position, where they are running down that. You can see they're running down that road. Of course, the buildings are all destroyed now. But if we whack that into the geolocation here, the running away from the tank is behind Russian lines, as you'd expect. They're in a Russian tank in that, and they're just running away. And that is way behind the lines. It's way behind at least 2 of the lines, and slightly behind another line. So there is absolutely no way that signifies a Russian advance. I just don't understand why the ISW have said that. And they often say this about Russian advances when they talk about Russian marginal advances. I don't know whether they're just trying to falsely show balance and therefore try and be as charitable to the Russians as possible. I just don't get it. But quite often you see stuff like that. So Andrew Perpetua said that this video is pretty funny and I have no idea what is going on, but I posted it not for those two reasons, but instead to show that Russia is continuing to lose ground in Pervomysky. And this video made me move the line of Russian control back even further. So they are being pushed back there. And he indicates that look, this is what it was like before. So you can see the Russian line coming down to the kind of northwest of this road, the edge of that pond there, and then the Russian lines slightly further pushed in line with that pond. It's only marginal, right? But the point is that Andrew Perpetua, and he's a pretty decent mapper, is saying that evidence shows that the Russians have been pushed back, not that they have gained. I mean, in a tank behind Russian enemy lines, abandoning it and running backwards is not a sign of advancing. So point being that no, I think the Russians have lost ground in that area. Anyway, that's pretty much all to say about Avdiivka, other than I think they're losing ground in Pisky, and that has been evident over the last few days. And then a lot of activity around Marinka. I don't know if that's all in Marinka or whether there's still a lot of activity. I assume there is to the south in Pobyeda and in this Kvitets fortification area there. There are several fortification areas. Lots of trench lines will be in all of these fields. As I was speaking to, it was Andrew Perpetua when I did a live stream with Andrew Perpetua, and someone's asking how many tree lines have trenches in, and he was like, yeah, pretty much all of them. I mean, it's just this is why everything is such slow going. And the Normandy blockage, similar to that slowed down the Ukrainian, the Allied advances in World War II after D-Day. Well, this is kind of similar. It is. You might think it's really easy, but actually there are just defenses in all of these fields, and it makes it really slow going. Right, there was talk about Ukrainian advances in this quarry area north of Volodymyrivka yesterday. There have been several attacks. The Ukrainians have attacked, I think, near Mikilska, and then if we go to the and then Vuhledar, we come to the ISW. Yeah, so Russian M&D claiming that they have repelled Ukrainian attacks in Vuhledar and Mikilska areas. I don't know exactly where that is and whether they have taken any territory, the Ukrainians, but that's happening there. We're coming to the Velika Novosilka salient that you can see is now a lot flatter than it used to be. It was obviously up here. So it's been flattened and there's consolidation of ground. Yesterday we saw the Ukrainians, according to Andrew Perpetua, had taken ground around Pryutne. They are knocking on the door. Apparently they're on the edge of Pryutne at the moment. Haven't heard too much about Orozhany and Staromoilska. And Suryak maps, Andrew Perpetua, and I put it, this is questionable, as in, I don't think it's a gain, I think it's a rejigging. I put refiguring his map here. He had the map coming down here for the Ukrainians, or at least sort of Russian defensive position, and has now pulled it back to here. I think he's probably seen some evidence to suggest that the Russians are actually defending tree lines around here. I don't think that they've advanced personally. There's no evidence of that, and on his map there's no arrow to signify that, so I think that's just him rejigging, and that would fit more in line with this kind of straight line you see of Suryak maps as well. But certainly very different over here from the kind of south of Rivnopil area. Suryak maps hasn't made any changes here, but Andrew Perpetua has. Right, let's go to see what some of the sources claim. There aren't too many claims about the Velika Novosilka salient. You can see, in fact, there are fewer arrows on this whole front line. War Mapper used to have an arrow around Marfapil, south of Halaipale, not anymore. And Drozhnyanka, sometimes activity around there, not anymore. So just the Orikhiv area, the Pyatikhatki area, and here we are at the moment in the Velika Novosilka area. Just really general claim here. Ukrainian forces are now fighting on the outskirts of Pryutne, apparently, and that is here. And I think that's also claimed by Rebar or another Russian source. Sorry, but anyway, nonetheless, if we come to Rebar says of the Vremivka area sector, which is the Velika Novosilka sector, that's just south of there. The Ukrainian command is regrouping its forces and redeploying reserves. I'm not sure it is redeploying reserves. No evidence of that. That would be an odd thing to do when you are using just probing forces, forces to do these probing vanguard attacks. I don't know that they'll be using reserves unless they have lost some forces and just taking from their counteroffensive forces. In turn, Russian artillery and aviation are hitting detected enemy dislocations and strongholds. So pretty general claims concerning activity around there. I'm fairly sure I've seen some claims. It might well be. Give me 2 ticks. Um, yeah, I can't find what I was looking for. Anyway, the ISW says of the area, the Russian MOD are claiming that Russian and other Russian sources that they have repelled Ukrainian attacks near Makarivka, Uruzhaini, Priyutne, and Staromayorsk. So all the places you're just mentioning: Priyutne, Staromayorsk, Uruzhaini, so on, and Makarivka area. So this area and Priyutne. So that is what's taking place there. No information about, as I say, Drozhenko and Marfapil. We come to a potential minor Ukrainian gain near Luhivska, so Novopokrovka. In fact, there are some claims that the Ukrainians are fighting in Novopokrovka. So we go to the Zaporizhia sources. We'll first see what the ISW says. So Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces captured an unspecified number of Russian positions near Luhivska. So if you remember on my map, I have Andrew Perpetua saying Luhivska was under Ukrainian control because he thinks it was being shelled by the Russians. So he thinks that is being controlled or that it has Ukrainian presence there. It's more likely in a grey zone for him rather than actually having Ukrainian control, like consolidated control. But he has, therefore, the Russians pushed back behind Luhivska. Syriac map doesn't, and there are claims from the ISW that there's activity around there, that the Ukrainians have taken positions near Luhivska and have advanced toward Robotina or Robotina. Russian sources claim that Russian forces repelled Ukrainian forces attacking with a grouping of up to 2 assault platoons near Robotina. Russian sources did not report ground attacks near Tikhatki, but claim that Russian and Ukrainian artillery is active near the settlement. Okay, so some of the other sources we're going to look to Robotina first. So I have adjusted the area under Ukrainian control southeast of Orikhiv due to the fact that there is consensus that the width of the Ukrainian advances north and northeast of Robotina is over 10 to 12 kilometers. So he is saying that has been widened, this salient, this bridgehead here. Both Russian and Ukrainian sources confirm fighting is on the outskirts of Robotina. And then here we have Ukrainian forces widen their control at Lubkova and Pyatikhatki and reach outskirts of Robotina. Furthermore, Russians have deployed their reserves to stop the Ukrainian advance, while the Ukrainians still haven't deployed their main forces. So this is the entire, one of the objectives for fighting is to get the Russians to fix their forces in place, their reserves. They're bringing up their reserves. It means they don't have reserves. So who's manning trenches back there? The Ukrainians have tricked the Russians in these positions, then it makes taking the trenches all the easier. And that is what Tendar is saying there. Right. So here we have a bit of a synopsis. So at the moment, the most alarming situation for the Russians is in the Orikhiv direction. On the 28th and 29th, the Russian counterattack, which was intended to push the armed forces back to the minefields north of Robotina, failed. This had serious consequences for the armed forces of the Russian Federation. In the early morning of the 30th, the Ukrainian armed forces entered Novopokrovka. So that is the source that was talking about how this town was entered by the Ukrainians, 3 days ago now, is the claim here. And then attacked it at close range, forcing the Russian garrison to flee in panic. In response, the 58th ZVA transferred special forces there, probably the 45th Brigade, which saved the situation so much that they still hold the southern side of the village. However, later on, July the 1st, the armed forces penetrated the junction between Bars 3, so these are Russian reserves defending at Robotina, and the 70th Motorized Rifle Regiment defending the area between Robotina and Verbove. Russian positions collapsed again. So he's saying that Russian positions between here, Robotina and Verbove collapsed. Again, take all these claims with a pinch of salt, of course. It is not known how far this offensive went, but it is clear that our actions continued for at least 48 hours without a break, exhausting the Russians as a result. There's no doubt that as soon as the Russians threw part of the 22nd Special Forces Brigade and several tanks to block this move, the main position of the 22nd Brigade was attacked by the ZSU, this time on the eastern flank of the Russians in the direction of Verbova, defended by the 407th Reconnaissance Battalion. So he's basically saying that uh, the Ukrainians are having quite a lot of success to the east of Robotyne, with the intention, obviously, of continuing down south to Novopokrovka, and you've got activity taking place in Novopokrovka at the moment and surrounding Lvivska. So there is movement. Yes, as Null Report said, this salient has been widened to 10 to 12 kilometers. So we put that on my map. That would look, so 12 kilometers would look like that. Okay, now let's see it. Can I move that whole line? Oh no, I can't. Dang. Well, that's annoying. So I presume that means this kind of salient there. So that would fall in line with Andrew Perpetua, sort of going towards Novopokrovka and then down. So that's the width of the Ukrainian attack in the area. Anyway, that's the activity taking place there. And just to go back to no reports to talk about Piatikhatki, Russian artillery fire was geolocated to the forest ridge southeast of Piatikhatki, confirming Ukrainian presence. So geolocated to the forest ridge southeast of Piatikhatki. So we go now to the west here. There's a lot of fighting around Piatikhatki towards Zerebianki. The Russians are hitting this forest area with artillery, which means the Ukrainians are there, which means they would control that, or it's in a grey zone at the very least, which is not in accord with Syriac Map's pro-Russian mapper. So I trust Andrew Perpetua more around here. There's been fierce fighting over the trenches north of Zerebianki, and I don't know that there's been much territorial change there. Right, let's now move on to, or actually, we'll go back to Rebar, who says of the area. It's back here. In the Zaporizhia direction, Russian units are counterattacking the advanced Ukrainian positions near Robotyne. The enemy, which had no time to consolidate, retreats and suffers losses in manpower and armored vehicles. So it's obviously all very pro-Russian, as you'd expect. A Ukrainian Su-25 attack aircraft was destroyed nearby. That's Adiivka. So there might be a Ukrainian Su-25 that's been lost. I don't know. Over the past few days, 3 enemy warplanes have already been destroyed in this area. So big claims about the loss of Ukrainian planes. You generally don't see the Ukrainians reporting on them or much footage of those coming out. It does happen though, and that it could be that Rebar is completely correct there. I'm not denying that a priori. So it might well have happened. Or at least some airplanes have been lost by the Ukrainians. This is why they need airplanes with longer range missiles, both ground attack missiles and air-to-air missiles as well, so they can fly in safety back here and release things on the front to attack areas on the front line. Anyway, there is activity around Kherson still, around the Antonivsky Bridge area. So what are the claims? In the Tavria direction, no changes. The Russians continue to level the bridgehead in the Duchy as fighters from the area report, quote, "The situation is difficult. The efforts are actively working with artillery in Grad. We've dispersed. We're holding the ground. Nobody has abandoned us. Our artillery is working on them. Specifically, the situation here is basically a stalemate, but the bank of the Dnieper is large. There are enough bridgeheads for everyone." So I find that quite interesting. Rebar admits that Ukrainian army has gained in Bakhmut and Zaporizhia direction, but claims that Russian army has repelled Ukraine's counterattack at Donbass region and the Antonivsky Bridge. So I told you yesterday that Rebar claimed that the Russians had ousted the Ukrainians there. However, today, Rebar says in the Kherson direction, fighting continues. So they haven't been ousted in Antonivsky Island, where the AFU landing groups are disembarking. So they're still disembarking in the area of the destroyed bridge. The full clearance of the area is complicated due to the constant AFU artillery fire from the opposite bank. No shit, Sherlock. It's like, why do you have to complicate us winning the war with your pesky artillery? Yeah, of course they're going to be firing artillery. Of course it's going to be complicating the issue. Uh, Natalia Humenyuk, the spokesperson for the Operation Command South, says near the Antonitsky Bridge, we continue the counter battery fight and try to knock out the enemy from their positions. So, yeah, it's all still happening around there. The Ukrainians are still there. They haven't been knocked out. There's a bit of rejigging. Suryat Maps has control. No, sorry, Andrew Perpetua has just obviously found some evidence that you Russians control a tiny part. Well, it is an island in and of itself. It's just a bit of land separated by this rivulet coming down there. I don't know what it looks like now post dam destruction, though. All this area could look quite different. But he has Russian control there that he didn't have mapped out before. Don't know whether that's a gain or just a rejigging, but everything around here is the same for him, for Andrew Perpetua. It's all grey zone pretty much, apart from there is no, I don't have the map there. There is, I showed you yesterday, there is this understanding that Ukrainians actually fully control this whole area coming up to the bridge. So, as that source said, there's plenty of space for bridgeheads. In other words, the Ukrainians can land pretty much anywhere along here. Uh, one would assume, as they control it, and they can launch attacks from there. But of course, this land isn't easy to maneuver on. There won't be roads. It will be particularly difficult given that it's been flooded by the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam recently. Anyway, that's the Frontline update for today. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much for watching with me. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.